Hey everyone, how are you? I hope everybody's good. So I'm just gonna give you a screencast here to talk about some of the themes in A Lesson Before Dying. Before I do that, though, I just want to tell you I hope you're all really well. I'm praying for you guys as we need to do at this time. Um, and yeah, it's weird. I mean, we'll work away at it and we'll get through it. So I've posted assignments. You all have a list of things you need to do. But I mean, really, we're all going to have to show a lot of patience and a lot of grace and just work together to get through these things. So do your best to get everything done on time. And if you have problems, please message me on EdSpeed. Let me know what your issues are. I will work and try my best to help you resolve some of these issues, and we'll get through it. We'll do this thing. So here we go. Right. Anyway, here's my discussion about some of the important things to look out for as you're reading A Lesson Before Dying. All right. So here we go. There's our buddy Jefferson in the picture. So the first theme that's really important is racism and injustice, and the novel clearly shows us that racism breeds injustice. So examples of this are blacks are forced to use the back doors. There was that incident where Grant and Tuntaloo and Miss Emma went to see Henri Pichot, and they had to use the back door. And Grant was told he never had to do that. So that's a symbol of their lower class in society. But they had to use the outside toilet in the courtroom. And we know from some of the research stuff you've done that they couldn't use the same restaurants, drink from the same fountains. So this racism breeds injustice. Blacks had inferior access to normal everyday things. They got an inferior education, right? They're only in school 6 months of the year, and that's because they had to work in the fields in order to survive. And the whites created that system, so they got only 6 months when everybody else got 10. Jefferson is clearly convicted because he's a black guy in the wrong place at the wrong time, not because the evidence really supported him having committed the crime. Even Jefferson's lawyer, he pleads for mercy based on the fact that the guy's not even human. He's a hog. Why execute a hog? So even their attempts at mercy are pretty flawed, to say the least. The whites obviously bet against Grant and Jefferson, and if you haven't got this far, you'll see that. Pichot and Guidry, his brother-in-law, the sheriff, they bet a case of whiskey that Grant won't succeed in turning the hog into a man, which is a pretty morbid way to bet, right? It's pretty awful. And then there's a scene coming up later in the book where Grant goes to a bar and there's these two mulatto guys. Mulattoes have one black parent, one white parent. They're like Métis in Canada. The Métis have one European parent and one Indigenous parent. So these two mulatto guys who are half white, half black, they treat the blacks like they're inferior as well. So the racism that they experience from the whites because they're half black, they pass on to the people that are fully black, if that's a phrase. And Grant ends up getting into a fight with these mulatto guys because they talk about Jefferson also like he's an animal, and because he's causing problems by being a murderer. Another important theme is what is a lie, and truth. Reverend Ambrose will define truth this way again in a later chapter, but he'll say that truth is really what is being compassionate. It's saying what is necessary to be a loving person rather than always saying exactly what's factually true. Grant has a more literal definition, right? Blacks, according to Ambrose, blacks lie to themselves in order to create hope, right? They downplay their suffering. They choose to see God as good, even though much of their lives are terrible, and they serve God. So they refrain from asking the question, God, I've done what you wanted, I've served you, I worship you, I go to church, I do all these things, and yet we're continually treated terribly. They choose not to take that route. They choose to believe that God is good and that suffering can be explained, and all those things are part of life. And so there's hope, right? Maybe someday this will change if we just hang on and be hopeful. The book really defines lies as what results from them, right? What is the result of telling a lie? If the result is negative, then that's really what you avoid. That's lying. Whereas anything that fosters hope and compassion, even if it's not totally factually true is seen as truth. It is not, or at least it's not questioned as a lie. Faith and hope are a big theme in the book. And faith, of course, is symbolized by Christianity in A Lesson Before Dying. I mean, as opposed to some other religion or faith in science or faith in human nature. The faith in this book is Christian faith. But it's complicated because Christian faith in the book is both hopeful and oppressive. And what I mean by that is the whites technically, or literally, have used Christianity to justify slavery, and they've used it to justify oppression. And the history of racism in the United States shows this. The slave owners were all Christians and would all say they were Bible-believing Christians. They all went to church. They all, believed in words all the things that we would say we believed, and yet they kept this system where they treated a whole group of people as if they were animals. So it's a complicated issue, the idea of Christian faith. Grant resents this. He resents the fact that the blacks are Christians because he sees Christianity as a white religion, and worse, a white religion that is used to oppress blacks. Reverend Ambrose believes that faith is not racial, that faith is faith, that Christianity is not to blame even though it's been used, right? Faith is essential. Faith in God is the only way to survive. It's the only way to keep on going. That really the only thing the blacks have left is faith. That's all they can hope for. So there's a real disconnect there. Grant resents religion because he sees it as a tool the whites use, whereas Reverend Ambrose embraces religion because he thinks it's the only way that they have forward. Jefferson has unclear faith. He's a simple person. He's developmentally delayed. I don't think he's against faith per se, but I don't think he really understands it. However, the lack of clarity in his faith does present some possibilities. So, for example, he tells Miss Emma he's strong and that he'll meet her in heaven. This happens later in the book. So he tells her that basically that he's a believer, even though I don't think he's even sure himself. Because he tells Grant he doesn't know. Like, am I going to heaven? Are you going to heaven? How do you go to heaven? He wonders if criminals go to heaven. He doesn't really understand, but he knows enough that Miss Emma needs to understand, needs to believe that he believes. And so he does that, which makes him, in a lot of ways, more honest or more compassionate than, say, Grant is. He won't do that, right? He won't do that for Miss Emma or for Reverend Ambrose. And I think it's clear that Grant sees Jefferson as a kind of secular Jesus. There's a chapter where they talk about the Christmas pageant coming up, and I think you'll see that there. Jefferson throughout the book is compared to Jesus in subtle ways. But yeah, so the idea of faith here is that faith is important about, because heaven is a possibility, is a reality for those who believe, but also because faith provides help and hope here and now. So it has both of those functions, a better future, but possibly a better present. Grant doesn't really believe in either of those two things. Plants and animals is an interesting theme as well. The book uses plants and animals to symbolize and to represent ideas and important concepts. So hogs represent inhumanity. Bayonne's main industry, or at least one of them, is a hog slaughterhouse. And of course, that invites you to see Jefferson as just another pig that the town is slaughtering. There's a butterfly scene at the very end of the book. Butterflies traditionally represent resurrection because they begin as caterpillars and then they go into a cocoon, which is a kind of death, and they reemerge as these beautiful butterflies. This is a theme in the chrysalids as well, right? David and Rosalind and Petra and the telepaths live in this terrible situation, and then eventually they're reborn when they're taken to Sealand, and they live in a kind of heaven that's sort of designed for them. Bluebirds show up in the novel, and bluebirds have always represented hope and a new future. So bluebirds appear suddenly, and when they do, they are symbols of hope. They've also been associated with the presence of angels in other traditions, literary and cultural as well. So sycamore trees, there's a sycamore tree outside of Jefferson's cell. Sycamore trees have traditionally represented vision and insight, and this goes back well before the Bible, but an example of this in the Bible is Zacchaeus climbs a sycamore tree in order to see Jesus, in order to gain insight. and he comes down a changed man. So he climbs the sycamore tree, he's transformed, he receives vision, he receives insight, and he connects with God and then climbs down and is a changed person. In Egyptian mythology, the sycamore was the tree of life. So the irony of Jefferson having a tree of life outside his cell of death is not lost, really. It's an interesting thing that Gaines uses. Sugarcane, which is the main plant that's grown on the plantation, it represents the Black community's connection to the land, right, because that's their livelihood, but it also represents their past, right, their slavery and the oppression that they've traditionally experienced, because it was always the crop, even when they were slaves. Masculinity and femininity is a big theme in the novel. Men are almost universally portrayed as weak or absent in A Lesson Before Dying. We know that Grant's parents have left to live in California. We know that Vivian's husband left her and ran away, which is why she's seeking a divorce. Matthew Antoine, who did Grant's job before Grant did his job and was in fact Grant's teacher, he gives in to the oppression. He gives up. He says you can try and educate them, but you're not going to do any good, right? The only thing you can do is run away. And that's what he told Grant. Matthew Antoine, in his dejection and surrender, he ends up dying very young. In the community, it's the women who carry the strength. It's the women who are strong, and they represent keeping the identity for the Black community. They represent, in a way, the future because they have the strength to carry the belief, the vision, whereas the men give up and take off, really. Miss Emma and Tante Lou plan Grant's relationship with Jefferson as a way to hopefully instill in at least Grant, but definitely Jefferson, this idea that men have a responsibility to fulfill their role in the community. And they're trying to recreate the negative definition of masculinity that the community has, where men are weak and run away, and create a hope for the future. And that's really what they're doing. They want Jefferson to know he's a man. They want that for him. But more importantly, they want him to die as a man so that the community will see that all men are not weak. All Black men are not losers, and all Black men don't just end up running away or being put in prison or being murdered. So they really see Jefferson as being able to set a positive example, right, for Grant. And they're hoping that Grant will set a positive example as well. But they can't make that happen. They can only create the circumstances in which it will happen. And that's the whole real important reason for the visits. Vivian backs this up because she refuses to let Grant basically wallow in his own self-pity, right? She constantly pushes back, right? She says to Grant, look, you say you want to run away, but you don't. You don't run away. Why don't you run away? And she says at one point, because you care about this place, or you love the kids that you teach more than you hate this place. And she wants him to hold on to that. She wants him to keep visiting Jefferson because she knows it's as much for him as it is for Jefferson. Right? And she refuses to run away with him, partly because she's still married and she doesn't want to lose her kids, partly because she's a teacher and doesn't want to abandon her students, right? But also because she knows that if she runs away with Grant, then he'll never have the chance to change. He'll never have the chance to face his own weakness. So she forces him, or tries to force him, to stay and face what he needs to face. So there you go. There's a quick run through of some of these themes. You can always rewatch the video and look at the slides in more detail. But I'm hoping that you'll see some of these things working their way through the novel, and a lot of these things will help you with essay topics, and they may help you find quotes for the commonplace book assignment as well. So I'll leave it there. Again, I hope you guys are doing well and you're handling the situation as well as you can. Know that I'm praying for you guys, and I'm available. Please message me if you have any questions. Let me know if you need any help with anything. Try and stick to the deadlines the best you can, and just know that we're going to have to work together to make this work, and we will do that. So take care, and I will talk, in air quotes, with you soon.